So great,
Perfect.
then let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the VIS full purpose session on scripts, notebooks, and provenance. My name is Alexander Lex. I'm at the University of Utah, and I'll be your session chair today. We have a set of great papers. I'm very excited. And please use the slider to ask questions. Also, I'll be monitoring the Discord. And so if you have anything to add to the discussion, please do it there too. And we'll kick it off with a talk by Wootton about charting EDA, how visualizations and interactions shape analysis in computational notebooks. So Dylan, please take it away.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. My name is Dylan, and today I'm going to be presenting our project on charting EDA. The data visualization literature is replete with examples of how interactive visualizations facilitate exploratory analysis. However, studies of data scientists in practice show that there exists an interactive visualization gap. That is, they rarely actually use interactive visualizations in computational notebooks. The authors point towards a mismatch between user workflows in EDA and the interactive tools that they have access to. We were interested in better understanding what these analytic workflows were, so we conducted a user study to be able to investigate the goals that analysts have as they are conducting an EDA and understand the actions that they take in this process. To do this, we recruited 13 data scientists and gave them 2 EDAs to perform. During the first EDA, they used a library that allowed for them to create static charts, as well as then in the second, an afforded capacity to create interactive charts. Note, we used Jupyter notebooks, so analysts were able to use a combination of code, charts, and interaction to solve their issues however they wanted. Given this setup, analysts made a number of observations as they conducted these EDAs, ranging from things such as if there's missing data to how their variables are related. They additionally performed many actions, such as creating a wide variety of charts, brushing and interacting with these visualizations, and even the notebook in total. In total, we see that these analysts create over 1,200 representations throughout 26 analyses and over 665 observations overall. If we were to analyze both of these separately, we could imagine having a results section that focuses on the quantitative results, just analyzing the telemetry logs themselves. And we could imagine having a separate section that focuses on the qualitative results, such as what insights these analysts find. However, inside of these types of results, the actions that analysts perform and the goals of those actions remain siloed, that it is impossible to directly say these precise actions that someone took and how those relate to the specific goals that they have. Inside of these cases, we lack context and precision inside of these sections. Our key contribution is a formalism that helps to bridge these 2 data sets. Notably, the formalism looks at EDAs as being a combination of 2 types of activities. The first one being actions that the analyst does, such as creating a particular type of chart. The second being the observations that analysts might make, obtained through their think aloud transcripts. The key of the formalism is through combining both the telemetry and the observations that are made through the use of representations. That is, by finding the specific representations that are used to make an observation and connecting those back to the telemetry, we can finally have a connection between the observations that analysts make and the specific charts in their interactive state that were used to make them. Now, I'll direct you to the paper for a full introduction into our formalism, but we'll remain at a high level here, just looking at telemetry, representation usage, and observations. Notably, this is able to take us from a more siloed methods approach to a truly mixed methods approach, where we are able to combine both the quantitative and the qualitative data generated by our analysts' EDAs. This allows for us to have more holistic descriptions of the specific behaviors that we observe in our analyst workflows. Let's take a look at what this formalism looks like inside of a sample analysis. Alex is a data scientist analyzing a sales dataset. He loads his dataset into a Jupyter notebook and creates a correlational heat map to investigate the correlation between all of the attributes in his dataset. Using this, he sorts on his target output and then looks specifically to see which attributes are most correlated with revenue, commenting on this is how he will use the heat map. From there, he creates a scatter plot between the most correlated attribute and his target attribute and comments that while there's an interesting pattern, it doesn't necessarily seem like these have a strong relationship. He goes back up to his heat map, looking at it, and then goes and creates another scatter plot inside of his notebook. Here, Alex comments, oh, there might be a relationship between these 2 variables. If we take a look at what Alex's EDA looks like inside of our formalism, it starts with the creation of a heat map. From here, he makes a plan of action utterance that is specifically referencing how he will plan to use this heat map. From here, Alex creates a scatter plot, mentions that he doesn't find a relationship, creates another scatter plot, and then finally finds a relationship between two variables. We can also encode additional information about Alex's EDA session, such as what scrolling patterns Alex experienced when he was exploring his data, how frequently he revisited particular types of charts in his analysis, the specific interactions that Alex had, and information about the observations that Alex made, such as which attributes inside of his data set Alex was focused on. We use this formalism to code 26 EDAs that average about 75 nodes in total per EDA session. And our second contribution is actually looking at how this formalism can help us better understand the EDA process. Now, our first section inside of our results focuses more on what we learn about our EDAs by just having the siloed methods approach. And then we have a second section that focuses more on what we gain by really taking this mixed methods approach to analyzing our analysts' EDAs. Now, I'm going to focus today just on the mixed methods approach, but you can refer to the paper for the full details. If you take a look at Alex's EDA and look at specifically just when Alex talks about relationships, look at specifically when these occur, for example, over all of our analysts, you start to get a distribution about when analysts are talking about certain things in the notebook. Notably, you can see specifically the time course of when they're talking about relationships during their EDA. Now, we wanted to do this for both the EDA1 and EDA2 inside of our analyses, where we start to observe some interesting trends that happen during the second condition. Notably, we find that during interactive conditions, we tend to find analysts talk about relationships more and earlier throughout their analysis. Notably, we find 15% earlier interquartile range when you look at when these relationships are being uncovered through an analysis. By looking specifically at the representations that people are using, we can find a little bit more information about why this is the case. Specifically, we see that instead of static conditions, analysts would typically create a profiler, as is seen on the chart, as is seen on the slides, that shows univariate distributions of all of their attributes. They would oftentimes comment specifically about the distributions, going chart by chart, specifically commenting about all of them. However, as soon as many of them began interactive sessions, they immediately added a cross-filter brush and began mining for relationships inside of this data set. Notably, we see a draw towards complexity, whereby when observations are made using an interactive profiler, these analysts tend to include more variables inside of what these observations are considering. In fact, it's 36% more attributes per observation given the interactive case. We find a similar behavior inside of scatter plots, whereby interactive scatter plots tend to draw analysts towards or are associated with more multivariate analyses. We note that this is something that we find across a wide variety of interaction techniques. People are even using tooltips, for example, to be able to mine what these other multivariate relationships are. Additionally, we find interesting results around how our participants are actually using representations in their analysis. Now, if you look at all the observations that someone makes and the representations that are used to make them, you might expect that these are normally distributed, that there's a one-to-one mapping between these. However, we actually find that there's a sort of 80-20 rule during EDA, whereby 80% of the observations are made with only 20% of all representations. Let's take an example of Alex. So inside of this case, Alex once again created that heat map and then consistently revisits the heat map throughout Alex's analysis. The heat map is one example of what we refer to as all attribute representations. These are representations, as you might have guessed, display information about all of the attributes inside of someone's data frame. We find that these types of visualizations tend to have a higher revisiting count. That means that they are revisited throughout an analysis time and time again. And when compared against other kind of more question and answer visualizations like line plots or histograms. We also note that these all attribute representations are associated with 5 times as many plan of action observations, which suggests that they play a role in EDA that is about how the analyst guides their entire analysis. We started off by wanting to understand the EDA workflows that our analysts were going through and how they were using a combination of code, visualizations, and interaction to attempt to solve these. And our results are able to shed light on some additional patterns that we observe inside of our analysts' analyses. However, there's a number of future investigations that we'd like to do using the formalism, moving beyond just connecting insights to telemetry by looking about the idea of analysis threads, that is, how are particular observations connected, and behavioral pattern mining of specific telemetry patterns. Furthermore, looking at how our formalism would extend in other visual analytic systems like Tableau or complex interactive visualizations is of great interest. Finally, we synthesize our results in the form of advice that we give about how to improve interactive tooling for EDA sessions. We note that there's a number of interaction techniques that we all observed really helped our analysts be able to find these relationships inside of their EDA. However, these are just 4 of the 16 different types of observations that we saw analysts create. What would it look like if we had interactive tools that would better help analysts make these types of observations? One example could be the plan of action utterances that we saw analysts make. What interactive tools would really help that? For example, inside of Alex's case, what Alex could have used would be a correlational heat map that, when clicked, allows for him to be able to see the specific bivariate relationship of the 2 attributes that Alex had selected. Now, with that, I want to thank all of my co-authors, as well as the MIT Visualization Group, and all of the folks who were able to give me feedback on this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Great talk. We have some questions on Slido. I'm going to ask first one from Slido. How do we know when the added complexity from interactive analysis is helpful versus leading the analysts down a rabbit hole of spurious associations?
Yeah, so that is a great question. And it's actually one of the things that I think we should be more careful of because we see a lot of these tools inside of notebook environments just adding interaction by default. If you look at pretty much every interactive, any like profile visualization, it will generally have some sort of like brushing inside of it. I don't actually think that it's always good to have more of these variables. In fact, we actually saw some of our analysts really struggle where they were adding like 4 or 5 variables within some of their observations, and you could tell that they just totally lost sight of what they were trying to analyze. So I think it's not necessarily something that I have a direct answer for, but I think it deserves additional thought beyond just let's add this interaction to EDAs.
Okay. One more question. Have you thought, could eye tracking data be integrated in the same formalism to also understand where participants are looking to find these patterns?
Yeah, I'm so glad that someone asked this question. So this is one of the things that we're really interested in exploring is beyond just the telemetry that we're recording on the screen and the verbal data, looking and taking an approach kind of similar to ChronoViz that looks at how multiple different modalities of this recorded data could be synthesized together to help us have a better understanding of how analysts are exploring the data.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dylan. There are more things to discuss, but I think we'll have to move on for the next talk. So thank you so much. Okay, next up we have Zhongsu Liu, who will be talking about Ferry toward better understanding of input-output space for data wrangling scripts. Looks like you're about ready to go.
Can you see my slide, X?
Yes, looks great. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Zhongsu from Zhejiang University. Today, I will introduce the latest paper from our group, Ferry, to the better understanding of input-output space of data wrangling scripts. Data wrangling is the process of transforming raw data into a usable format and content for downstream tasks. It can be conceptualized as a pipeline comprising multiple data transformation steps. Typically, data wrangling is performed using scripting language and their associated libraries. Data workers need to understand these scripts in various scenarios, such as reusing existing scripts, validating scripts generated by large language models, and onboarding new data. Existing research has primarily focused on how tables change during data transformation. However, these studies often overlook the importance of revealing the input and output space of data wrangling scripts. Additionally, existing methods require executable data to assist data workers in understanding scripts. However, in many real-world scenarios, users cannot access executable data due to restrictions. This dependency on available data limits their applicability and effectiveness. Inspired by previous research and existing tools like Excel database, we observed that constraints commonly used to restrict values, formats, and relationships in data tables. We have realized that leveraging these constraints can help represent the table space. Consequently, we propose a constraint-based approach to help user understand the input and output space of scripts. However, leveraging a constraint-based table space to enhance script comprehension presents two key challenges. First, constraint extraction from script is complex. Single-step data transformations are diverse and semantically rich, requiring substantial knowledge to construct constraints. Moreover, scripts typically comprise multiple transformations, necessitating the integration and analysis of interrelated constraints. Second, constraint presentation is challenged. Constraints lack the concreteness of real data, making them less intuitive with existing profiling tools. Additionally, the table space is constructed by multiple constraints can be difficult for users to understand in terms of their collective impact. To address these challenges, we have developed a comprehensive approach. Firstly, we summarize 10 types of constraints applicable to the data wrangling domain through 4 steps. We analyze and summarize 22 commonly used data transformations and their impacts on table changes based on the multi-table framework for wrangling and the semantic descriptions in existing work. Next, we review data constraints in existing constraint solvers and relational databases. We identified the specific characteristics each constraint imposes on tables in a candidate pool of constraints. Next, we establish a mapping showing the effects of the 22 transformations on table constraints from the candidate pool. During construction phase, we introduce new constraint types and remove unused constraint types. And based on the data transformation features, we define 4 scopes of constraints and use different colors to present them. Finally, we organize and categorize the updated candidate pool, resulting in 10 constraint types. Okay, next step, we design a constraint generator to derive constraints from scripts, which comprise 4 modules. Input table space inference generates input constraints for single-step data transformations, and forward inference generates the output constraints. Next, backward propagation propagates updated constraints from subsequent steps to earlier ones, and the backward inference supports backward propagation by transferring updated constraints from output to input. Lastly, we developed an interactive visual analysis system called Ferry to help users understand input-output space. To develop Ferry, we conducted several rounds of interviews with 4 experienced data wrangling experts to formulate design requirements. I will now present a video demonstrating the system design of Ferry.
Ferry comprises 3 views: script view, constraint view, and detail view. The script view provides a lineage graph at the top, illustrating data column and conflict provenance. Below is a user-uploaded script, where a user can modify the script and observe associations between constraints and code. The constraint view visualizes the constraint-based table space. We employ diverse visualization techniques for different constraint types. Constraint icons represent atomic constraints like type and missing value. Overlay bar charts depict range constraints. Constraint tags display types and content for other constraints. Additionally, we provide sample data generated from both constraints and semantics. The detail view provides in-depth constraint information, enhancing user comprehension. It includes constraint explanations and examples, present data conflicts with constraints, support user add, delete, modify the constraints, and locate constraints within the script.
Okay, next I will present a case study demonstrating how Wendy, a data analyst, employs Ferry to verify whether an existing data wrangling script is applicable to new data.
Wendy uploads both the script and the data to Ferry for analysis. Ferry detects 2 conflicts within the script. By clicking on the constraint tag, Wendy reviews the lineage graph and corresponding code in the script view and the conflict data in the detail view. She identifies the need to update the regular expression used for data extraction. Subsequently, she clicks the type icon in the grad column, discovering that the script lacks code to convert the grad column to date type. After re-executing the modified script, Wendy confirms that the previous conflicts have been resolved. Subsequently, she reviews the output table space and notes that the duration column's value range does not align with her expectations. She modifies the range constraint in the detail view. Upon resubmission, a new conflict appears in the info. Inspecting the conflict data in the detail view, Wendy modifies the code and rewrites the script. Ferry alerted her to a new conflict in the info column. Further investigation reveals a previously unconsidered corner case, prompting her to revise the script again. Ultimately, Wendy resolving all conflicts and gets the expected script.
Okay, to evaluate Ferry's effectiveness and utility, we designed 2 case studies, applying existing data wrangling scripts to new data and assisting users in verifying the compatibility of 2 data processing modules with our test data. These cases demonstrated Ferry's capability to help users efficiently debug and check scripts, uncovering hidden errors. We also conducted semi-structured interviews with participating data practitioners. They affirmed Ferry's ability to support their daily tasks. In summary, our main contribution includes 10 types of table constraints applicable to data wrangling, a constraint generation model, and an interactive system that helps data workers understand scripts input and output space. In future work, we aspire to enhance the usability of Ferry, evaluate its efficiency and scalability, and explore potential research direction. That concludes my presentation. I'm ready to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great talk. Thank you so much. We have a few questions already on the Slido. So the first one is, are there any other application scenarios for the input and output constraints generated by Ferry?
Besides helping user understand, debug, and check the scripts, the input and output constraint generated by Ferry can be used to generate test data for the scripts, and our sample data can have rich semantics that help data workers better test their scripts. And our constraints also can be applied to generate documentations for scripts by translating constraints into natural language to create interface documents of the scripts, and also our constraints can use to validation the data. And that's all.
Okay, thank you. Another question we have on Slido is whether Ferry has explored other visualization techniques to help users understand the constraints beyond direct representation. I guess you have that for ranges, but are there any others that you have considered?
Yes, Ferry has tried different visualization techniques, and we, through our iterative design process, and we designed the different visualization for different types of constraints, like formats, like regular expressions. But the expert give us the feedback, this visualization need lots of learning curve, and they told us just give us the constraint directly and with sample data that can help us better understanding the table space.
Okay, great.
Which led to the current design.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. There are a few more questions. It would be great if you can answer them on Discord. Thank you so much, and we should move on to our next speaker.
Okay, thanks, Alex.
Great. So our next speaker is Klaus Eckelt. He'll be talking about loops, leveraging provenance and visualization to support exploratory data analysis in computational notebooks.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors, you and Kiran from the University of Utah, and Marc from the Johannes Kepler University Linz, where also I am from. I would like to start with a short introduction to the notebooks on which our work is based. Notebooks are documents that consist of cells which may contain descriptive markdown, text, or code, and the output of that code, such as also text, data, or visualizations, will be part of the notebook. And notebooks are super popular. From 2017 to 2020, the number of notebooks and notebook users has doubled annually. Why? Well, one reason is probably because they support data analysis tasks very well. Rule et al. Described data analysis as iterative and exploratory, and we named our approach loops in reference to the loops Piroli and Card used to describe the data analysis process in 2005. Loops should support analysts in this process. But why is that even necessary? After all, cells can simply be edited and re-executed to see the new result. So you can quickly go back and refine previous cells or steps and re-execute the subsequent ones. Well, that's exactly why. The notebook only shows its last state. So if we make a change, the previous code and its outputs are lost. This means that we cannot compare the result, and if the new results were calculated based on previous ones, we might not even be able to reproduce them. Often this leads to analysts duplicating cells to be able to compare results. The issues that people have when working with notebooks and the reproducibility of notebooks was the topic of many previous papers. They identified the tracking of the analysis process as a major challenge, and if you only look at the notebooks, the results could often not be reproduced. We designed loops based on the issues reported in this and previous papers. With loops, we support the analysis process by visualizing the notebook's history next to the notebook. We show how the cell's input and output change for code, text, data, images, and visualizations. For that, we track the provenance of the notebook. Here in this notebook, we have one markdown cell and two code cells. From the notebook itself, we could see that most likely the last cell was executed multiple times. With loops, we track the notebook state after every cell execution to see how the notebook has changed. We store the input and output of each cell, for example, the code and the visualization image it produced, the type of change, and which cell was executed by whom, using the track library. Next, we identify the differences between these versions. These could be cells that have been added or removed, or inputs and outputs of existing cells that were changed. Here we have the input and output changing between version 3 and 4 of the notebook, as well as between version 2 and 3. The last cell of the notebook was added after version 1, and its first two cells were added in the first version of the notebook after starting from a blank one. As you may know from yourselves, quite a lot of changes and thus notebook versions accumulate when you repeatedly edit and execute a cell while working on it. That's why we had thought about strategies to aggregate the notebook's history. To aggregate, we not only check for how the cells changed, but also in which order they changed and in which order they were executed. Here, the notebook was executed from top to bottom, with the last cell being executed multiple times in a row. We aggregate all changes that follow the linear order of the notebook, which combines all notebook versions in this very simple example. The motivation for that was that while the analysis process is typically not linear, its steps still build on each other. Data must be loaded before you can explore it, you're going to clean the data before modeling, and so on. These dependencies are also reflected in the notebook, as a study by Ramasamy et al. Has shown. While notebooks are most likely not structured as in a reference pipeline at the top, the cells are still in an order that we can leverage. So when you go through your notebook, top to bottom, we can consider that a signal analysis loop. But if you go back, for example, to change the data preprocessing, we will aggregate these changes into a new version that can be compared to the previous one. So let's see how these differences actually look like. Each notebook version can be shown with a compact or a detailed notebook diff. Both visualizations show the contributor of each version at the top, and a bar chart at the bottom that shows the temporal distribution of the notebook versions and the extent of their changes. The compact notebook diff gives an overview on the evolution of the notebook, showing all cells in the same small size. We embed icons that indicate the content of the cell, an execution counter, and color code the cells according to the type of change, or added, removed, changed, or unchanged cells. This way, you can identify cells and notebook segments that were edited the most. The actual changes within the cells are then shown in the detailed notebook diff and uses the same color encoding. We have different visualizations for the various types of content in notebooks: code, text, data, and visualizations and images. Loops always aligns the history of the cell that is currently active in the notebook, so you can quickly compare a cell over time. And the detailed notebook diff also shows who edited a specific cell and how often it was executed by a person. Let's take a look into our first use case of the paper, where we have analyzed the inflation in ticket prices for Austrian concerts. As we browse through the history, we can see how the brush in the timeline at the bottom is updated to show the currently visible time range. The individual compact diffs can be expanded. I will do that for the most recent one in this notebook, to see how that notebook version changed in comparison to the previous one. Changes to individual cells can also be opened in a separate panel dedicated for cell comparison. Here for this bar chart, additional data became available, increasing the bar's length, changing the labels, as well as the x-axis. As known from code editors, all difference visualizations in the cell comparison support side-by-side comparison or a unified diff view. Here we have the unified view for visualizations. You can brush between the old and the new version, and that would be an example for the side-by-side comparison of two versions of a scatter plot with regression lines that show the price trends for multiple venues in Vienna. If you're interested in how we compute these differences, I invite you to check out our paper where we have a step-by-step illustration in the appendix. For code and plain text, we use Meyer's diff algorithm, an algorithm that is very often used to compare text, and is also used in VS Code and in Git, for example, to compare code. So we use the same in loops. It is also applied for Markdown and rich text generated by Markdown. And for tabular data, we use an approach that is similar to Taku, proposed by Christina Niederer et al. We gathered feedback on loops by interviewing notebooks users with various backgrounds: a student, a lecturer, data scientist, and a researcher, which all work with notebooks regularly. And they also experienced the same problems as described in the literature, which we used to guide the design of loops. The feedback on loops was that overall they found the encodings very intuitive, and they particularly liked the difference visualization for visualizations. They also pointed out the utility of loops in collaborative projects to see what other collaborators changed in the notebook and what happened since they last visited the notebook or edited the notebook themselves. What they missed was an onboarding to the workflow within loops, and for the comparison of tabular data, they would like to be able to compare the whole data set and not just the subset output to the notebook. That already brings me to the end of my talk. I could only scratch the surface for the various different visualizations. So if you want to discuss loops in more detail, I will be in the Discord hallway chats afterwards. And on the website to a paper, you can also find links to the repository, to an online demo on Binder, and much more. Thanks for taking the time to hear about our work, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Klaus. We have a few questions already on Slido. First one is, what are your thoughts on reactive notebook tools such as Observable or Marimo? Would loops be relevant in those where out-of-order execution is not an issue?
Yeah, I think so. We also discussed it in the paper briefly. Of course, reactive notebooks solve a lot of problems you have in a classic Jupyter notebook with this out-of-order execution, and that like the state of the notebook is in some weird in-between state that is not really reproducible. But on the other hand, if you change a cell at the reactive notebook, it triggers a lot more changes in all the other cells that depend on it. So I think there it might be even more helpful to see what actually happened after a change.
Yeah, cool, thank you. Then we have a question by Jack Wilburn. Does this tool help users find cells that might be affected by a change, but that are not rerun since the change?
No, that is currently not possible with loops. We may have a very so our approach is based on what is visible in the notebook, so it isn't dependent on any programming language, and we also don't analyze the syntax tree of the language, for example. We just work with what is output to the notebook and what the analyst that works with the notebook sees.
Okay. Then Alex Endert is asking a question: how do diffs in the visualization show up when charts are changed more holistically, for example, from a bar chart to a scatter plot?
Yes, then we do not show these explicit encodings by default. So we have a similarity metric that checks how similar the charts are. And if they are very dissimilar, we just juxtapose them. And if they are more similar, then they are superimposed and the explicit encoding is shown. So we have some heuristic based on similarity to steer that, because if you change the chart type, you would also see it in the code, of course.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Klaus, I'm sure, is available on Discord for further questions. So let's move on to our next speaker. Okay, next up, we have Connor Scully-Allison, who will be talking about design concerns for integrated scripting and interactive visualization in notebook environments. Connor, I see you're ready to go, just next door from me, so please take it away.
And great. And you're able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Perfect. All right. Well, then let me get rid of this right here. Sorry, tech things. Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Alex. So hi, I'm Connor. I'm presenting today on this design concerns for integrated scripting and interactive visualization in notebook environments. And I'm presenting on behalf of all of my co-authors here who are all across the country. So to start off with, I want to put us all in the shoes of a data analyst that's working in a Jupyter notebook like the one you see here. And to make it a little bit more specific, let's say that we're analyzing a data set that looks like this. It's hierarchical. It can be expressed as a tree. And to make it, say, even a little bit more complicated, we can say that each of these nodes in this tree has many variables on it, all of a wide variety of types. You know, you got strings, floats, ints, things like that. And whenever you're working inside of a Jupyter notebook, analysts, they're able to do a wide variety of tasks using different modalities, sometimes visualization, sometimes scripting. And one of those tasks, for example, that they might want to do with a data set like this is filter all of their data based off of a wide variety of these different metrics on these nodes. Now, this filtering can be fairly complicated because it's so many different metrics, but we could theoretically build up a visualization that will allow us to adjust sliders until we just get the right amount of nodes that we're looking for. Or we can use some built-in scripting functionality to just write a filter and apply it to our original data set. In my case, I would definitely probably choose to use the filtering. Now, hypothetically, let's say that we're doing a different task inside of our Jupyter notebook. And in this task, instead of doing something like filtering, we're just scanning over our data set here. We want to compare parents to children, cousins, things like that. And in that case, we again have that choice. We could either visualize it or we could do a script. We could, of course, write a script that will tell us things about how nodes relate to each other in our tree. However, it'll probably just be a lot easier, because we're doing this very frequently, to just throw it into a visualization and pan and zoom over our visualization, look at the nodes individually. Now, this kind of poses a question. With all of the freedom that we're given in our Jupyter notebooks, how do we as visualization designers support both this point and click interaction for some tasks and scripting for others? Well, to answer this question, we took a two-tiered approach. First, we developed a conceptual framework for assigning tasks to interactive visualization or scripting modalities. And second, using this conceptual framework, we designed a notebook-embedded interactive calling context tree for our collaborators that are working in the software performance analysis space. Now, before I dive into these approaches here, I do just want to explain our collaborators' data with a little bit more detail. They're working with a particular type of tree called a calling context tree, which have some interesting characteristics. They're very wide and large, and they have a lot of variables on the node, as you had seen there. Now, returning to our two-tiered approach, the framework that we developed for assigning these tasks and modalities can be expressed with this Venn diagram right here, where there are some tasks that are naturally good for scripting and some tasks that are naturally good for visualization, like, say, Anscombe's quartet here, whenever we're just looking at the structure of a data set. But then in the middle of that Venn diagram, we have that gray area where things are a little bit ambiguous. And for that, we define this field right here that has two axes, which help to give us guidance on whether something should be assigned to visualization or scripting. Along the bottom axis is task frequency. How frequently is our analyst doing this task? And then along the left axis, we have task specificity, which is both complexity and concreteness in the mind of our analyst. And whenever we place our initial examples on this, you can see that our filtering task is on scripting in the upper left there. And our scanning over the tree task goes down into visualization in the lower right. Now, we took all of these tasks, took all of the tasks that we got from our users, and we assigned them to either visualization or scripting using this approach. And using that, we built the following visualization: a calling context tree that was designed to be embedded inside of a Jupyter notebook. It supports a number of basic interactions, point-and-click interactions, and we also used bivariate encoding to show those multiple variables to our users all at the same time. Now, in addition to developing this specific visualization, we also had to support this fluid interaction between the visualization side and the scripting side. So we developed a framework that allowed us to ensure that visualizations updated automatically whenever you change in code, as you can see in the top diagram here, and also that allowed the data model to be updated inside of the notebook whenever you change something in the visualization, say like subselecting some points. Some examples of this, some concrete examples of this I provide here, where a user is defining a custom filter on our data set down here, and they're just going to specify that they want to remove some nodes with particular names. When they run it, it should, there we go, remove those nodes and automatically update the visualization to reflect the changes. On the other side, whenever we see here that you can select, when we're going from visualization to script, our users are selecting some points in the visualization, but there's not a lot of room for the table in the upper right. So we provide another visualization that syncs to the state in the notebook where they can select a large number of nodes, and it's automatically updated in sympathetic visualizations in the notebook. So we evaluated this visualization in two ways. First, just did the visualization itself directly, and second, we evaluated this notebook interaction. For this visualization evaluation, we gave it to 7 individuals, and we just asked them to perform some tasks. We got pretty good feedback overall. They really liked the visualization, but some people thought that the scripting viz workflow was a little unintuitive, especially because we had them doing manual updating where they had to sync the state themselves. So we implemented that automatic updating, gave it back to our users, had them do some tasks to explore that. And we found that people really liked it. They thought it was much more intuitive with the auto updating. And we even got one of our individuals to flip their opinion, where originally they were skeptical. And then after that, they thought it was much better for exploring their data. Thus, we walk away with the idea that designing with visualization and scripting in mind enabled us to provide a useful and intuitive interface for our collaborators, giving them unique avenues to understand and interact with our data. All right. And that's it for me. I'm happy to take any questions. I also have all of my socials here. And I'll let you know I'm on the job market looking for research positions or postdoc. Please contact me. And I wasn't able to give out this sticker, but if you do see me in person, ask me and I will give you a sticker. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor. Great talk. I hear the applause. So we're still waiting for Slido questions to come in, but maybe here's one from me. Like, you've done this not specifically for network visualizations, for tree visualizations. What would it take to expand this to other visualization types?
Since I think the primary contribution of this is a task analysis or a way of assigning your tasks, I don't think it actually takes a lot to adapt this to other visualization types. I think people just need to take their task analysis that they're doing at the beginning of their visualization design and apply it to that sort of field or characterize them by their specificity and their frequency. And that should enable them to build up a visualization fairly effectively.
Okay, great. And then you also mentioned at the beginning of your talk that you have very wide and very highly multivariate networks.
Mm-hmm.
But in your visualizations, I didn't really see that addressed all that much. Do you have like ideas on how that is visualized, or do you just select the attributes that you want to visualize?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alex. So these visualizations that I chose here, I put down because they can fit fairly well. But the way that we addressed it is first by filtering on like small number of nodes and just aggregating them as quickly as possible so that 10,000 nodes becomes, I don't know, like 1,000. And then we expected that people would filter their data set down to a reasonable level after they got it to render just to begin with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Connor. Let's move on to the next speaker, and thank you again. Great talk. Next up, we have Gustavo Moreira, who will be talking about Curio, a data flow-based framework for collaborative urban visual analytics. Gustavo, please take it away.
Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. My name is Gustavo Moreira. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Illinois, Chicago. This work is a collaboration between several universities. So welcome to our presentation entitled Curio, data flow-based framework for collaborative urban visual analytics. So in this work, we propose a framework for collaborative urban visual analytics using a data flow model that focuses on interoperability and cross-domain collaboration. We'll better understand how our tool works in a little bit, but let's first take a look at the challenges we're trying to tackle. So in our previous work, we proposed UTK, a grammar-based framework for urban analytics, and we explored how grammars can increase accessibility. Even though we managed to accomplish some of our goals, we realized that the iterative and collaborative natures of urban analytics cannot be fully supported without exploring the concept of workflows. And that's the direction we are heading with Curio. And these workflows can be really diverse. So for example, two works we conducted surveyed 130 and 170 papers covering 50 years of research and a large diversity of workflows. But let's start for a second and take a look at how a typical urban analytics workflow might look like. So a typical workflow requires multidisciplinary teams. So think about urban experts, for instance. Let's say architects, urban planners, climate scientists. They can all be involved in this data lifecycle that usually starts with the data collection, then followed by data cleaning or transformation, which will feed some analytics and modeling approaches, and finally some visualization can be created to extract insights. All those steps present many challenges of their own due to the complex nature of urban analytics. So for more than a decade, researchers have been designing systems to integrate all these steps. So these visual analytics systems are born out of collaborations where urban experts inform visualization experts about domain-specific problems. So Curio aims to reinforce continuous communication between the two groups, so both in the design and implementation phases. Additionally, this collaboration is enhanced by ideally involving all individuals of both groups. To do that, Curio is based on three main design goals. The first goal, collaborative visual analytics, is related to the fact that urban visual analytics problems require a multidisciplinary team, as I said before. And to accomplish that, we support shared data flows and an iterative process with continuous feedback and opportunities for adjustments. The second goal, flexibility and modular design. So to avoid reworking every new data flow created, we support the use of templates that can preserve parts of previous data flows to be reused. And finally, reproducibility and provenance of modules. Here we aim to enhance efficiency and transparency of these collaborations by implementing provenance that facilitates the understanding of the evolution of the data flow and also allows the exploration of previous versions of it. So let's take a closer look in each one of these three main features. So in general terms, collaboration is supported by allowing multiple users to work on the same data flow and communicate with each other. These users can work at different interconnected levels of abstraction. So at a lower level, users can directly write Python code. Moving up a little bit, grammars like UTK or previous work can be used to define complex 3D visualizations with a very short JSON specification. Next, users can connect variables and parameters in the code or grammar to UI elements by using annotations. And finally, the higher level abstraction is the visualization mode, where all complexities of code, data handling are hidden, and users interact with the workflow similarly to a deployed system. So now let's talk about templates and our modular design. So when a node is populated with code or grammar, the user has the option to transform the node into a template that can be used later by less skilled users. Templates are saved to a local file that can be shared with other users. And our final main feature is the data flow provenance. So our system keeps track of changes in the whole data flow, like the addition or removal of nodes, as well as the multiple versions of a single node. So users can navigate between multiple versions to quickly change parameters or compare models versions, for instance. Before we dive into a concrete example, let's just see what are the data layers that Curio supports. So Curio supports three major groups of layers. So we have thematic, related to data that comes from sensing and simulation, for instance. We have images, and we also have physical, that is more related to the shapes of the urban environment. So 3D, 2D, network, for instance. So now we can finally see an example of a Curio data flow. So imagine that you want to model the workflow for an what-if scenario planning, where shadow casting simulation is done for a section of the city. Some changes are done in the height of the buildings, and the shadow is simulated again. The final goal is to see the difference between the two simulations. So let's use this specific task as our guiding example to understand how Curio works. So step by step, we replace this typical urban workflow with our guiding example using Curio. To start, a single data loading node can be used to replace the first step of the workflow. So here we loaded OpenStreetMap data is visualized in a table node. The content of this data loading node can be seen on the top right corner. The next step is data cleaning and modeling. So for this example, the data already follows the format that we want, so we're just going to skip straightly to data modeling. A modeling node is used to simulate the shadow casting on the buildings loaded with the data loading node. As you can see in the top right corner, we added annotations to the code to expose certain variables of the code in the UI. And now we can finally visualize the output of the model. So by using UTK, our previous work, we can visualize the shadow casted. On the top right corner, you can see the UTK grammar. So given its flexibility and modularity, Curio allows us to go beyond what the typical workflow entails. So by adding a couple of extra nodes, we can create the alternate scenario for the shadow simulation. Here you can see a new type of connection highlighted in red. There's an interaction connection, and it's used to propagate interactions with the buildings to a data transforming node that will be responsible to change the height of the selected building and run the shadow simulation again. Finally, we add a new node that allows us to calculate the difference in shadow between the two layers, highlighting the difference in a final visualization node in blue. Now that our data flow is pretty much ready, we can move a step further to make it even more accessible to less skilled users. So by activating the visualization mode, all connections, codes, grammars are hidden from the final user. This what-if workflow together with two other user scenarios were used to evaluate our tool. So the user scenarios were urban accessibility, urban microclimate, and sunlight access, the one we just built. So now let's see how Curio can be used for the last scenario. So as you can see here, progressively the user can define each node that will compose the data flow from a diversity of nodes available on the left side. Each step of this data flow can be tested individually, which facilitates the debugging process. The nodes can be rearranged in any way that makes more sense to the users, and the acyclic nature of the data flows allows for an easier reading of the data dependencies. So it's always going from the left to the right. The arrangement of the nodes for the visualization mode is independent from the data flow mode, so the two configurations can exist at the same time. In terms of feedback, experts in urban accessibility, urban microclimate, and a climate scientist highlighted that Curio is a good visual alternative to making sense of complex workflows, with a strong emphasis on customization and collaboration. On the other hand, some experts missed functionalities that could be incorporated in future versions of Curio and pointed out the need to learn a new tool. For future work, we aim to support full synchronous collaboration sessions, as well as integrating other important sources of data. Additionally, more in-depth evaluation is also needed. Moving forward, Curio is a big part of a bigger ecosystem called OSCUR, that stands for Open Source Cyber Infrastructure for Urban Computing Research. And this is a multi-institutional collaboration supported by the National Science Foundation, and you can check more information on the link or QR code on the screen. So thank you for your time and interest in our work. You can get more details about it on the website. I want to thank all supporting institutions. I'll be glad to answer any questions, and if you want to reach out, my information are there.
Thank you, Gustavo. Great talk. I'll kick you off with a question. When you did your evaluation, have you ever noticed that your end users wanted to jump back into the data flow pipeline and modify things, or were they completely content with the like simplified abstraction that you showed them at the end?
So you're talking about specifically about the provenance and the possibility of going back, right?
Yes, exactly. Like, you know, they might have wanted to change something.
Yeah. So that depends a lot on how skilled the user is. So if you're someone, so our approach with Curio was that we wanted to support different levels of abstraction. So people that really don't know how to program, for instance, could just use templates. So those kinds of users, they're usually more prone to not explore all the features of provenance because they kind of get confused with the thing. So they are just using these building blocks and using the most surface level features. But if you are someone that is working with machine learning, and we do have a use case for machine learning in the paper, and you want to tweak the model a little bit, so you are a more advanced user, then people can definitely leverage this provenance a lot better and go back and tweak and do stuff like that. So yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Let's move on to our next speaker. Thank you again, Gustavo. And we have our final talk of the session, which will be presented by Satyanarayan on Provenance Widgets, a library of UI control elements to track and dynamically overlay analytical provenance.
Okay, quick mic test.
Yes, everything is working. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, I'm Arvind, and I'm here today to talk about provenance widgets. Consider this rain slider one often encounters on the web. Now, if I interact with it a few times, after a point, all I can tell is that my current selection is 65 to 75. Now, consider this enhanced provenance widgets rain slider. As I interact with it, it keeps track of all my interactions and presents them visually as dynamic bar chart overlays. So in the same final state, I can now get a lot more information, like taller bars mean more frequently selected ranges, darker bars indicate more recently selected ranges, a bar with a solid border indicates the current selection, whereas a bar with a dashed border indicates the previous selection. So this is what we refer to as the aggregated summary view. I can also review the historical sequence of my selections, or essentially how I reached my current state from the initial state. Let's take a look. So we designed this footprint icon next to the widget that helps toggle between the default aggregated summary view and a detailed temporal history view. This view contains a point plus line chart showing all selected states between the initial state of 0 to 100 at the top and the current state of 65 to 75 at the bottom. And color is once again mapped to the recency. So we have these three views that can be identified with and toggled between by clicking these three footprint icons we designed. By the way, these overlays are interactive, as in if I hover on them, a tooltip shows additional details. And if I click on them, for example, a bar or a point, I can go to that state again. Provenance widgets treats this as a new state and appends it to the provenance log, as you can see the newly added range at the bottom. All in all, we developed such provenance overlays for single sliders, range sliders, radio buttons, checkbox groups, single selects, multi-selects, and input text. Our motivation was that there is currently no front-end library of UI controls that tracks and presents such provenance information out of the box. So we followed a three-step design process wherein we first reviewed different UI controls, conducted design exercises before finalizing everything. First, we reviewed the various aspects of UI controls, such as structure-wise, all elements of radio buttons are always completely visible, unlike drop-downs, which require an additional click and potential scrolling to bring some aspects into focus. Next, layout-wise, sliders can be oriented vertically or horizontally, unlike drop-downs, which are oriented horizontally with their menus opening vertically. Next, with respect to initial or default values, radio buttons can have an uninitialized state with no selections, unlike sliders, which generally have the handles preset to some default value. Then with respect to subsequent values, we all know this, checkboxes can have multiple selected values, unlike radio buttons, which can have at most one selected value. And finally, to interact with these widgets, for sliders, one generally drags the handles or clicks on the rails, whereas for radio buttons, one directly clicks on an option. So after this review of UI controls, we conducted design exercises, wherein we explored what metrics to log as provenance and when, and where and how to present them. First up, what? So we chose to track and visualize two metrics, the frequency and recency of selections, because of their utility and relevance to provenance tracking and also effective visual encoding. Next, in terms of where to present provenance, we considered always visible visual sends that are near, on, or around the widgets, or more on demand, potentially in an external view. Next, in terms of how to present provenance, we sketched different combinations of marks or chart types, such as area, bar, and line, and visual encodings, including color, size, and position. And finally, in terms of when to log provenance, we considered two kinds of analytic time, every user interaction, or more specifically, whenever the widget's state changes, or every second. Check out the temporal history view for a single slider. For the same sequence of interactions, the interaction mode on the left shows the points evenly spaced out, unlike the time mode on the right, where things are more uneven. Finding utility in both, we chose to support both of them. And eventually, we finalized these designs while balancing for several aspects, such as consistency and ease of development. Implementation-wise, Provenance Widgets is built on top of the PrimeNG framework and the NGX slider library. Architecture-wise, Provenance Widgets follows the Model View Controller, or MVC design pattern, wherein the view is what the user interacts with. The controller passes the raw interaction data from the view to the model, which stores this data for subsequent processing. Now, for a developer to implement a Provenance Widgets range slider in their application, they must still write some TypeScript and HTML. In particular, define the variables corresponding to the slider's range, a function that listens to the selection events, other options such as the step size, and the HTML DOM element. The cool part is that except for the highlighted Provenance slider wrapper component, everything else is native to and inherited from the base library APIs. So by default, all provenance tracking and overlaying is out of the box, while enjoying the other benefits of the base libraries. Let me show some use cases. First, a widget to visualization, wherein we update a visualization based on interactions with the provenance widgets. So consider this scatter plot showing life expectancy and fertility rate values for different countries, and a control panel with two provenance widgets on the left. Now, if I modify these widgets to filter the visualizations, the widgets will rightly leave a trace behind. And to program this behavior in TypeScript, we first define a function, widget updated, that filters the scatter plot based on the input model value. And then in the HTML, we bind the selected change event listener property to this widget updated function we just defined. And that's it. Next, visualization to widget, wherein we can supply provenance externally to then update the widget. For example, consider another scatterplot system, this time with acceleration and horsepower from the same good old cars dataset. Essentially, if we brush the visualization to select a certain range of points, we can capture the brush extent and overlay it onto the widgets as well. Now, to program this in the HTML, we override the provenance property by mapping it to a model variable, say acceleration. And then in TypeScript, we define a function, for example, visBrushed, that captures the brush events in the visualization and appends it to the data property of the acceleration provenance model. We finally set the revalidate property to true to then refresh all the visualizations downstream. Using provenance widgets, we were able to replicate the core functionalities of three kinds of prior widgets: centered widgets, phosphor objects, and dynamic query widgets. I'll show the first two today. Centered widgets are graphical user interface controls enhanced with embedded visualizations that aid navigation. Now, to replicate these, we override the provenance property with some static data, for example, historical usage logs, and set the freeze property to true, which will literally freeze provenance tracking and always show the preset data. Next, phosphor objects show the outcome of any change in the widget's state instantly via an afterglow effect. Essentially, they show the current selection and the previous selection. To replicate these, we can once again override the provenance property, and with each interaction, keep slicing out provenance history except for the current and previous points. And there you go. For our evaluation, we conducted expert case studies with 4 developers. We tasked them to develop a Pokemon Explorer system using provenance widgets. Our study protocol included an onboarding interview to explain the task and share resources like documentation, source code, starter code, about 1 week time to work on the task, and an offboarding interview to share the developed systems and feedback. Overall feedback was positive, and these are the 4 applications that were built. P1 found the library to be robust, but the task to be time-consuming. P2 found the sample code to be helpful, and so on. Provenance widgets is open source. On behalf of the entire team, I invite the community to use this JavaScript library into your next provenance tracking project. Install it via npm install provenance-widgets. Shout out to my co-author Kostuk for making the library framework agnostic with both Angular and web components available for broader usage. For more information, including documentation, showcase, and starter code, visit provenancewidgets.github.io. Please read our paper for more information, and a big thank you to the entire team, Kostuk and Alex from Georgia Tech and Mena from ETH Zurich. Thank you.
Thank you, Arvind. Great talk. It's a really cool idea. Let me kick it off with a question. Do you see the applications of provenance widgets mostly in analytical interfaces, or could you even imagine this in, let's say, I want to shop for a television on Amazon.com?
Thank you for the question. So we built this keeping real-time provenance in mind, like most useful for visual analytics purposes. But we could envision a more static use case, like you are shopping, and we often want to know what others have purchased, or what are the other ratings, what is the distribution of those things. So like centered widgets proposed way back in the days, provenance widgets could also be configured to just show that. They could be used or misused to nudge the user one way or the other.
Okay, cool. Klaus, Eckelt is asking, I may have missed it, but can you restore previous states of a single control like a slider, or of multiple controls such as checkboxes?
You could restore a previous state, but it will append it as a new state. So it's not like it will cut or trim the history up until that point. It will add it as a new state. So that's the current functionality for now, but we can explore multiple options, including branching, which track supports. So that's like our next step. Yeah.
There's another question. Is the provenance data meant more for a reader to improve their own exploration, or for the system author to improve their design?
Both ways. So with this library, we want to give a medium to not only collect provenance information, like track it, but also visualize it. So depending on the use case, a developer could just embed provenance widgets into a mode wherein the user does not see the insights, but the logging is still happening, or both of them, or none of them. So it's flexible at this point.
Great. And one last question by Jack Wilburn. How do you handle overplotting of multiple states on the widget?
Thank you. That's a great question. We are working towards that right now. So for 15, 20 interactions that I perform for a demo purpose, the widgets look good and nice. But how do they handle scale like 1,000 interactions and so on? Can I pinpoint a particular rectangle to hover on it and then click to go back? That's something we'll keep on working on in subsequent iterations.
Okay, well, thank you, Arpit, and thanks again to all of the speakers in the session. It was super exciting. Lots of cool stuff happening around notebooks. We're at the end of the session and at the end of the day, and I hope to see you all again tomorrow. Bye.